The buried diary. The police lights painted everything blue and red. The walls, her hands, the wedding album torn open on the desk. "Ma'am, step back from the weapon," the officer said. But Elena was already standing motionless, the ledger in her grip, watching Thomas's face collapse into itself as the sirens cut through the winter night. She had nothing but paper and silence, yet she held everything. That was the moment she understood. The person who controls the story controls the house, controls the children, controls the future. 13 hours earlier, the attic had been nothing but dust. The yellow rubber gloves were still wet when Elena knelt into the unfinished pine planks. Her knees pressed deep into the wood grain, and a cardboard box labeled Christmas 2012 scraped across the floor under her palm, leaving a clean streak through 12 years of settled gray dust. Outside, the wind rattled the attic frame. Inside, only her breathing, muffled behind a paper mask, and the soft sound of cardboard on wood. She had been meaning to clean for months. Thomas had been absent more. That was always the trigger. When he disappeared into his work, his late nights at the office, she cleaned, reorganized, found order in chaos. A floorboard beneath her left knee gave. Not just a creak, a sickening dip, the wood surrendering an inch to her weight. Elena shifted, her gloved fingers prying at the edge of the loose plank. The wood splintered upward with a sharp crack that echoed in the silence, revealing a dark, square hollow between the joists. A space that shouldn't exist. A space meant to hide something. She reached in. Her hand emerged clutching a small lacquered jewelry box, its black surface dulled by a decade of spider webs. The webbing came away in her glove like cobwebs themselves. Dry, brittle. The brass lock was small, heart-shaped, and rusted green. Elena pulled a flathead screwdriver from her back pocket. She jammed the metal tip into the gap between the lid and the base. Her wrist twisted. The tiny brass lock snapped. The metal latch flew across the room with a high, sharp ping that seemed to echo for an impossible length of time. The lid flipped back. A leather-bound diary titled Memoranda in gold foil. Beneath it, a stack of Polaroids. The edges faded, the colors bleeding into one another the way old photographs do. She picked up the top one. Her husband, Thomas, kissing a blonde woman in a red coat. The woman's hand was on his neck. His hand was in her hair. Elena's thumb swept across the Polaroid. She flipped it over. Black ink, careful handwriting. Our first anniversary. 12 years to go. T. 12 years. She looked at the date on the photograph corner. October 2011. That was 13 years ago. Her hand began to shake. The Polaroid fluttered to the floorboards like a falling leaf. She picked it up again, then set it aside. Then picked it up. Her breath came in shallow pulls through the paper mask. The dust around her seemed to grow denser, the air thicker, as if the attic itself was contracting around her. She didn't remember how long she knelt there. The back door slammed. The sound echoed through the entire house, shaking the copper pans hanging on the kitchen wall. Thomas entered, a blast of cold air and sleet following him like a ghost. He dropped his heavy leather briefcase onto the tile floor with a dull thud. Elena was standing by the stove, her back to him. She had changed out of her cleaning clothes. She was wearing her oldest sweater, oversized, gray. The diary was now tucked into the waistband of her jeans, pressed against her spine, hidden under the fabric. The fake Polaroid, no, not fake, real but designed to be found, was in her hand. Thomas walked up behind her, his arms reaching around her waist for the habituated hug they performed every evening at 6 p.m. It was one of those things they did. Hug, kiss, ask about the day. It was the anatomy of a marriage that had already died. Elena spun around with the cast iron skillet still in her hand. The heavy metal swung in a sharp arc. The whistle of it through the air was almost musical. It stopped an inch from Thomas's ribs. He stumbled backward, his eyes wide, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "What the?" Elena shoved the skillet onto the counter. She reached into her waistband and slammed the black lacquer box, now empty, onto the granite island. The wood cracked against the stone. Small pieces of the inlay scattered like shrapnel. "Found your time capsule in the attic, Thomas." He looked at the box. His face didn't show guilt. It showed something worse. A sharp, predatory calculation. He realized the diary wasn't there. His pupils dilated. In that millisecond, Elena saw him make a decision. He lunged. His hands grabbed her wrists and pinned them against the countertop. His grip was cold, disciplined, painful. She could feel his wedding ring pressing into her skin. "Where's the book, Elena?" His voice was low, urgent, controlled. "It's not what you think. It's evidence." Elena struggled, her body arching away from the counter, but he was heavier, more grounded. His breath smelled of expensive gin and something else, something sour and foreign. Thomas leaned in close, his nose almost touching hers. "Give me the diary, or we all lose everything. Not just the marriage, the house, the kids. Give it to me." The front door kicked open. Laughter, footsteps, teenage voices calling out greetings. Thomas instantly released her wrists. He smoothed his silk tie with one hand and wiped his face with the other. In a split second, he transformed. The predator became a father. The menace became comfort. "Kids are home," he said, his voice suddenly warm, even-keeled. "We should probably—" "Don't," Elena said. Just that one word. But he was already turning toward the hallway with a wide, fake smile. Maya and Leo tumbled through the entryway like teenagers do. Loud, wet with sleet, oblivious to the current running through the house like an electric wire. Maya was swinging a wet umbrella, spraying water across the entryway rug. Leo was fumbling with his muddy sneakers, trying to take them off without sitting down, hopping on one foot. Elena remained leaning against the counter, her hands hidden behind her back, clutching the edge of the granite. She could feel the sharp corners of the diary against her spine through the fabric of her sweater. A weight, a presence, a pounding heartbeat pressed against her body from inside out. The laughter stopped. Maya's smile faltered as she looked from her mother's pale face to her father's rigid posture. She dropped the wet umbrella. It hit the floor with a rhythmic thwack slosh. In the silence that followed, Elena could hear the wind outside, the hiss of the stove pilot light, the sound of her own heartbeat in her ears. She pushed off the counter. She walked toward the stairs, brushing past Thomas without looking at him. Her movement was stiff, robotic, disconnected from the normal human body. She left a single red-stained smear from her knuckle on the white doorframe. Behind her, she heard Leo say, "Mom?" But she didn't turn around. Elena sat on the edge of the unmade bed. The diary was open to the first page. The date was January 12th, 2011. The handwriting was cramped, frantic, the letters pressed so hard into the paper that you could feel the indentations with your fingertip. Her finger traced the name Sarah, underlined 3 times in red ink. She flipped forward. The entries were short, cryptic, written in a code that became clearer as she read. S. Coming over. Elena working late. Perfect. June, July, August. Each one marked with a date and a location and a description of how long they had. She flipped forward again. A loose bank statement fell out. Chase Bank. A series of $2,000 withdrawals every 2 weeks for 3 years. The recipient was listed as S. Miller. 3 years. 72 withdrawals. $144,000. Elena's jaw dropped. This wasn't just love. This was a payroll. This was systematic. This was planned. The bedroom door crashed open. Thomas didn't walk. He charged. He tackled Elena onto the mattress, his weight crushing the breath out of her lungs. She gasped. He reached for the book in her hand, and she felt her fingers clench involuntarily. The diary pressed against her chest like a shield. Elena drove her knee into Thomas's solar plexus. He wheezed and rolled off, his momentum carrying him over the side of the bed. He hit the hardwood floor with a heavy thud. She scrambled to the other side of the bed, clutching the diary to her chest, gasping, the muscles in her legs shaking with adrenaline. A gold necklace she had been wearing, a gift from him, from their anniversary 5 years ago, snapped under the pressure of her movement. The beads scattered like hail across the hardwood, pinging and rolling under the furniture in a cascade of tiny, perfect sounds. Thomas recovered, standing slowly. He wiped a line of blood from his lip. His eyes were black and hollow. Elena, Sarah isn't just a mistress. She's the daughter of the CEO. If this gets out, I'm not just fired. I'm in prison for the embezzlement she helped me cover. His voice was low, measured, each word placed with precision. It was never about her. It was about the money for this house, for Maya's tuition, for you. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving, but his eyes were steady, unflinching. Elena looked at the diary in her hands. She looked at the man standing in front of her. No, not the man she married, but something that wore his face. Something that had been wearing his face for 13 years. "Give it to me," Thomas said, "or everyone loses everything." Elena placed a steaming white porcelain tureen of soup in the center of the mahogany table. Butternut squash. It was Tuesday, and Tuesday was always butternut squash soup followed by grilled cheese sandwiches. She had been making this dinner for 10 years. It was one of the unchanging things, one of the patterns, one of the small rituals that held the family together. Her hands were steady. This terrified her more than her hands shaking would have. The diary was tucked into her chair's seat cushion, pressed flat against the mahogany, hidden by the curve of her body when she sat down. Leo ladled soup into his bowl. The liquid splashed slightly, spreading a yellow stain across the white linen tablecloth. He looked at his parents, his spoon hovering halfway to his mouth. The silence was a physical weight, like humidity before a storm, like the moment before a light bulb shatters. Thomas sat at the head of the table, cutting a piece of bread with a jagged silver knife. His movements were precise, aggressive. He didn't look up, but he watched Elena's every breath, tracking her eyes, monitoring the rise and fall of her chest. Elena picked up her wine glass. The red liquid sloshes against the rim. She stared at Thomas over the crystal, not blinking, not flinching, just staring. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked loudly, each second a hammer strike. Tick, tick, tick. Maya suddenly dropped her fork. It hit her plate with a deafening ring, a sound so loud it seemed impossible that it came from metal and ceramic. She stood up, her chair screeching backward on the hardwood floor with a shriek that made everyone's shoulders tense. "Stop it," Maya said. "Just stop pretending." Her voice cracked on the last word. Leo looked up at his sister, then at his parents, then back down at his soup. Thomas set down his knife with deliberate care. Elena took a sip of wine. It tasted like blood. Thomas stood up. His shadow loomed over the table, stretching across the wall until it touched the ceiling. It looked like a monster's shadow, Elena thought. It looked like something that didn't belong in a human home. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a burner phone. Black plastic, anonymous, disposable. He slid it across the table toward Elena with one finger, the way you might slide something contaminated. Elena picked up the phone. The screen flickered to life. CCTV feed. Her children's school entrance. Maya's locker was circled in red. A text message appeared below the image. One word from her, and the light goes out. The words seem to glow, burning themselves into Elena's retinas. One word. One conversation with a police officer. One confession to a friend. One moment of honesty. And the light goes out. She didn't understand what that meant. Not exactly. But her body understood. Her body understood in the language of survival. Thomas leaned over the tureen, steam clouding his glasses. Sarah's father is a very powerful man, Elena. He doesn't like loose ends. That diary is the only thing keeping him from cleaning house. Literally. Elena looked at her children. They were frozen, looking from the phone to their father. She realized, in that moment, with the clarity of a knife point, that Thomas wasn't just the villain. He was a puppet. And the puppet master was someone named Sarah's father. Someone she'd never met. Someone whose reach extended into her children's school, into the video feeds of their lockers, into the apparatus of their daily lives. The diary wasn't evidence against Thomas. It was evidence against Thomas that could be used against the man who owned Thomas. She was trapped in a triangle, and everyone inside it was drowning. Elena bolted. She lunged from her chair, her sneakers squealing on the hardwood floor. She sprinted toward the attic stairs, her hand catching the banister and swinging her body upward in a frantic arc. Her heart was a fist beating against her ribs. Thomas was right behind her. His footsteps were heavier, slower, but he was climbing, always climbing, his hand reaching. He grabbed her ankle just as she reached the top landing. Elena's face slammed into the carpeted step, her chin bouncing off the wood. Pain exploded in white stars. She felt him pulling her backward, her fingernails tearing on the carpet as she tried to grip something, anything. Elena kicked out with her free leg. Her heel caught Thomas in the throat. He gagged, his hand releasing her ankle, his body convulsing. She scrambled up the remaining steps and slammed the heavy oak attic door, throwing the deadbolt just as his shoulder hit the outside. The impact shook the entire frame. "Elena!" His voice was muffled, furious. "Elena, open this door!" She stumbled to the back of the attic, past the old cribs and moth-eaten coats, past the boxes of things they couldn't bear to throw away. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip the wooden edge of the old rocking horse. The one she had ridden as a child, the one she had meant to restore for Maya, before Maya grew too old for such things. She pulled open the hollow space inside the horse's body. Her father's silver revolver lay there, wrapped in an old, oily cloth. It was heavier than she remembered. Colder. She pulled it out and held it with both hands, her fingers finding the trigger, the safety. Behind her, the attic door wood began to splinter. Thomas's boot came through the center of the panel, sending sharp shards of oak across the floor like splinters of a fractured skull. Again. Another boot. The space was growing, a mouth opening in the wood. He was going to break through in seconds. Elena stood in the center of the attic, the revolver aimed at the door. Her arms were shaking, the barrel tracing tiny circles in the air. The single light bulb above her head flickered and hummed, casting her shadow on the sloped walls. A figure holding a gun, dark and enormous. Thomas stopped kicking. For a moment, there was only the sound of wind through the joists, the hum of electricity, her own breathing. "Elena, did you check the dates?" His voice came through the hole in the door, calm and terrifyingly low. "Really check them? April 31st? June 31st? Elena's eyes went to the diary on the floor. With one hand, still holding the gun, she flipped to June. There it was. June 31st. Sarah came over. June only has 30 days. The diary fell from her fingers. It landed on the wooden floor with a soft thud. "I put that there years ago, Elena." Thomas's voice continued through the broken door. "I knew one day you'd go snooping. I needed to see if you'd go to the police or if you'd come to me. You failed. But the real one, the real evidence against the CEO, that's in the house, but you'll never find it." She heard his footsteps walking away from the door, retreating, leaving her alone in the attic with a fake diary and a gun, and the understanding that everything had been a test. Maya and Leo were huddled at the bottom of the attic stairs, their faces blotchy with tears. Thomas stood before them, his shirt torn, a small scratch visible on his face. He was whispering to them, gesturing up at the locked door, his voice soft and protective. Elena pressed her ear to the oak door, hearing his words. "Your mother is having a break. She found some old stories I wrote and thinks they're real. She has a gun. We need to keep her calm. Is Mom okay?" Leo's voice was small, fractured. "Your mother is having difficulty right now," Thomas said. "But we're going to help her. We're going to be very brave." Elena heard Maya's response, her daughter's voice thick with tears. "Mom, please put the gun down." She didn't hear herself respond. There was nothing to say. No explanation that would undo what Thomas had just constructed with a few carefully placed words. He had taken the diary, the evidence, and turned it into her own derangement. He had rewritten the story in real time. She sat on the floor, her back against the oak door, the gun resting in her lap. The cold metal was already warming to her body temperature. She heard Leo say, "We're calling 911. The sirens, when they came, seemed both impossibly fast and impossibly slow. Elena stood on a stack of old trunks. The small, grimy attic skylight was above her head, thick with dust and dead insects and frost. She punched out the glass with her fist, wrapped in an old cloth. Glass rain fell onto the snow-covered roof tiles outside. She pulled herself up through the narrow opening, her body scraping through the frame, her clothes tearing on the jagged edges. The cold was absolute. Snow covered the roof tiles in a thick, slippery layer, ice beneath the snow. She pulled herself out fully, onto her knees, breathing hard, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. 12 feet below, the ground was white. One wrong step and she was falling. Elena slid down the icy shingles, her fingers clawing for grip, the metal gutters coming up fast. She caught the gutter. The metal groaned and saged, and she swung herself through her own bedroom window 2 floors down, landing in a heap on the hardwood floor, gasping, bleeding from a cut on her shoulder. The house was silent. She could hear sirens in the distance, but they didn't seem to be getting closer. Yet. She moved through the house like a ghost, not turning on any lights, not making a sound. Down the hallway, past the children's rooms where she didn't look inside, to Thomas's office. His filing cabinets were locked. She broke them open with a lamp base, the glass shattering, the metal denting. Inside were files labeled with numbers and dates and names she didn't recognize. She pulled them all out, threw them on the desk, searching. No, not there. She ignored his files. She looked at the shelf instead. The Our Wedding album was there, the leather worn from handling. She pulled it down and opened it to the center. Their wedding kiss, the moment captured in time, the moment everything was still possible. She ripped out the photo. Behind the velvet backing was a thin, real ledger. Leather-bound, dated, filled with handwriting in what looked like Thomas's hand. Names, amounts, dates. The systematic recording of a second life. The real evidence. Elena clutched it to her chest. Downstairs, she heard Thomas's voice. She heard the sirens getting closer. She heard her children crying. She descended the staircase slowly, the ledger in one hand, and in the other, picked up from the office desk, the silver revolver. Thomas was in the hallway, speaking to a police officer. His words were careful, sympathetic, the vocabulary of a concerned husband. He was describing his wife's break from reality. He was expressing his fears for her safety. He was the picture of a man in distress. The police officer saw Elena at the top of the stairs. He saw the gun in her hand. "Ma'am, step back from the weapon," he called out. But Elena was already standing motionless on the third-to-last stair, the ledger in one hand, the gun in the other. Thomas's face went white. He had thought the diary was fake. He had thought he had won. He didn't understand that Elena had circled back to the beginning. He didn't understand that she had found the real evidence not in the attic, but in the place where he kept his heart's true record, the wedding album. The place where memories are supposed to be kept, immortalized and unchangeable. But memories, like everything else in this house, had been corrupted. The police were gone by 10 o'clock. Statements had been taken. The ledger had been photographed and placed in evidence. Thomas had been arrested, though he had maintained his composure, insisted on his lawyer. Made it clear that the ledger was part of some elaborate fiction his wife had constructed. It didn't matter. The CEO's daughter, Sarah, had been detained at the airport in Miami, trying to board a flight to the Cayman Islands. The financial records had corroborated everything. The house of lies was collapsing, floor by floor. The children were sleeping. Elena stood by her bedside drawer. She opened it slowly. The real ledger, the actual evidence that had been photographed and catalogued, but which she had also kept a copy of, just in case, was inside. She placed it carefully in the drawer's deepest corner, beneath old scarves and forgotten jewelry boxes. She turned the small brass key with a slow, deliberate click. The key slid into her pocket. Thomas was sitting on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. He was a broken man, his world collapsing, his future crumbling into dust. He didn't move when Elena walked past him. She didn't touch him. She didn't speak. The silence was the point. Elena looked at the family photo on the nightstand. 5 people smiling at the camera, frozen in a moment that had already been erased. She saw the Tyoma, the nickname she used to call him, short for Thomas, the name she had given him when they were young, and she still believed in the person he was pretending to be. She picked up the frame and turned it face down on the wood. The glass made a satisfying final clink. Elena walked to the window and pulled back the heavy curtain. The winter night was absolute black. The kind of black you only find far from the city, far from the lights. Snow was still falling, each flake disappearing into the darkness, becoming part of something larger than itself. She thought about the attic, the space beneath the floorboards where she had first found the fake diary. She thought about the hidden spaces in this house, the cavities and voids and places where things were kept hidden. Every house had them. Every marriage had them. The question was what you kept there, and who got to decide what was real. In the morning, she would tell the children that their father was having some difficulties at work, that he might need to spend some time away from the house, that they should be brave and kind and keep the family together. She would arrange for a new lawyer, one who specialized in protection orders and custody agreements. She would find the best therapist for each of them. She would rebuild the visible architecture of the house while maintaining the secret rooms underneath. For now, she stood at the window in the dark, watching the snow fall. Thomas was still sitting on the bed behind her, but he was no longer there. He was property now. He was a shadow that moved through the house at her permission. He was the thing you owned when you had the leverage to destroy him and chose not to. He was hers, and the ledger in the drawer was the key that would keep him exactly where he needed to be. Elena closed the curtain. The cold glass was smooth under her palm. She didn't turn back.